I'm Nancy Hazard. I'm with Green Greenfield, and I have a few thank yous. And I want to introduce a couple people. Thank you. So I want to introduce Elizabeth Erickson, who just walked away from the table. And these are three people who have been working with Green Greenfield on the pollinator effort. And on the way back is Mary Westervelt, and then up here in the front is Dorothea. And so they've been working on events like this and also working on building native habitat around town and at Just Roots. I also want to thank a couple of Green Greenfield members who have been helping tonight with logistical issues. So at the registration table is Emily and Patricia Green, and at the door, Dorothy McIver. Is she still out there? She's probably still out there. Yep. Okay. And then I want to have a special thanks for Cheech Masucci, who's over here at the video machine. She's going to be videotaping the talk tonight, and then for people who couldn't come tonight and maybe you want to watch it again, or maybe you want to pass it on to your friends. That'll be really great. And finally, I want to thank the Second Congregational Church for offering this beautiful space that we can use for this event tonight. So today is Earth Day, the actual day, yay! So what a great way to celebrate with a speaker who's going to talk about soil health and our very special planet, the Earth. This is the final event of a series that we've been doing called Working with Nature to Restore Our Climate. And I'm curious if you could just raise your hands or do a little survey here. How many of you came and watched Water Cools the Planet with us? Okay, a couple of you, great. And how about the next one, Life Sustains the Climate? Not many. Oh, maybe two, a couple here, okay. And then we sent out an email afterwards with a link to the film that those two things came from called Regenerating Life. And we urged people to watch the third piece of it, which we're not showing, which is Small Farms Feed the World. How many of you saw that email? A few of you, okay. And how many watched that last piece? No, not yet. Okay, great. Okay, now I want to introduce Dorothea Soteris. She inspired this series, and she is going to introduce our final speaker. So please welcome Dorothea.
Everybody. Well, we're really happy to welcome Rachel Lindsay. She's our speaker this evening. She is Senior Designer and Worker Owner at Regenerative Design Group. And Regenerative Design Group is a design firm based here in Greenfield that serves homeowners, colleges, urban farms, nonprofits, and municipalities. And they specialize in designing landscapes that engage users, build healthy soils, showcase green infrastructure, provide pollinator habitat, and grow food. And Rachel has experienced farming and community development and graphic communication. She's passionate about native plants, local ecology, and growing food. And she's inspired by the time she spent living in Latin America. She holds an MS in Ecological Design from the Conway School and a BA in Anthropology from Wesleyan University. So this evening she's going to talk to us about healthy soils at home, ideas for improving soil health while increasing climate resilience. Healthy soils are really good at capturing and storing significant amounts of carbon and water, and this is a really good thing. And Rachel will also share what she learned working on the Mass Healthy Soils Action Plan, the first statewide plan of its kind that addresses non-agricultural soil management. After her talk, we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments. Thanks. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nancy and Dorothea, for welcoming me and for a very thorough introduction. I don't think I need to to introduce much else. I could just get right to slide 40 at this point. But yeah, thank you, and thank you all for coming in on such a gorgeous evening. What a beautiful day to be Earth Day, and yeah, what a temptation to just stay outside and enjoy it, especially this time of year. So I hope this is a worthwhile hour here, and I'm really excited to share this work. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is might feel very familiar. It dovetails with a lot of things that I know you are all, the spheres that I know you are all probably very much involved in. But the framework for bringing these things together from academics and from gardeners and from scientists into a public policy sphere in the state itself is very, very new. And how we translate that information into something that can follow through and have a measurable impact on a larger scale it's a huge endeavor. And there's a lot of energy behind it, and there's been a lot of people talking about it. It's been a really, really exciting project for Regenerative Design Group to be involved in for the last 5 years. So I'm very excited to be able to share it right here at home. So Regenerative Design Group is a worker-owned cooperative. We have 11 members, and where we have kind of 3 arms at the moment. We have the site design, landscape design arm. We have a planning arm that does municipal and regional planning around climate resiliency, and we have a regenerative agriculture arm that works primarily with farmers. So tonight I'm going to start with the basic building blocks of soil components. We'll take a little step back to our high school earth science class and start by just reviewing what soil is actually made of and what makes it healthy when we talk about healthy soil. And then I want to share with you some of our findings when we put together the Massachusetts Healthy Soils Action Plan. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have some time to run through some case studies and some projects that we've been involved in and what we've learned from them in terms of implementing these good ideas. So what is soil? One thing that we know for sure is we know what soil is not, and it's not the same everywhere. We know that there are different types of soil all over the world that provide the framework and the habitat for all different kinds of ecosystems. It's one of the many beautiful reasons why there's a diversity and biodiversity around the world. When we break down soil into soil components at the first level, we find primarily soil is mineral substance, almost 50% of it. That comes from the bedrock, from the stone, the parent material for the soil, air, and water. It's pretty basic. This is what people, what's the difference between soil and dirt? Your toddler might ask you, as mine might. This might be one way to answer, which is, well, dirt is the minerals and the water and the air that is just the substance. And soil has the 5 to 7% organic matter in it. But if we isolate out that organic matter, that part of the soil, which is life, we have what we call the abiotic soil forming features, or the inherent features of soil. The 5 to 7% organic matter that is labeled as such when we send our soil to get tested at a extension can also be further broken down. And that's what we call biotic soil forming features. So the vast majority of this is humus. It's the dark organic matter in soil that's formed by decomposing plant and animal matter. 5% of that section of organic soil is the soil microbiome, which is such a rich, thriving fraction of our soil that it should be an entire talk in and of itself. But this is where we find the earthworms, the pill bugs, the nematodes, bacteria, fungi, algae, all kinds of different forms of life that are constantly in flux. And it's an area that is not only exciting in that it's incredibly complex, but it's also exciting in that there's a lot of research that is revealing new things every day that we didn't understand about the relationships, the complex relationships between all of the different organisms. And of course, we know that this is just a snapshot of a fictional, like, representative soil. So all of these percentages would change depending on where you were in the world and what handful of soil that you took up.
Could you, so we're looking at the organic substance, the 7%, and then there's 5%? I can't read what the last, how that fits together.
Okay, so we're looking at the handful of soil that we have, where 5 to 7% of that will be this organic matter, soil organic matter, which is 85% humus, which is this decomposed plant material, 10% plant roots, and then 5% of that is comprised of all different forms of living microorganisms.
Including worms.
Including worms. So this goes, these arrows are expanding this section of the pie into its own full pie. So, and this is what we call the biotic soil forming factors. So this is where the life comes into soil. One of the most basic ways to talk about soil is by looking at its texture, soil texture. This is clay, loam, and sand, sand, silt, and clay. This is the combination, essentially it's a combination of the size of particles. So if you're screening particles in the soil out and classifying them by size, we're talking here about the ratios of all of these different minuscule particles of minerals in the inert part, the abiotic part of soil. These are very stable over time. So you get what you get, pretty much. You can change slightly, we can influence with some amendments, but it's really largely determined by the parent material of soil, which is bedrock. So soil forms over hundreds to thousands of years. Small incremental disturbances, wind, air, water, change the decomposing plant matter, organic matter, slowly over time builds up more and more soil. It all starts with the bedrock. So as we progress through time here, in this diagram, we'll start with a landscape that is predominantly rock. Organic debris and small grasses and small shrubs will start to form. And then over time, the diversity, the biodiversity here grows along with the depth of the soil as it develops. And eventually, a fully mature soil, like soil in a lot of the sand plains, river plains, temperate soils around here, will sort of settle over time into these horizons. The organic horizon at the top, the A horizon, B horizon, C horizon, which as you go down, this organic material decreases and you get closer and closer to the parent material or the bedrock. As we disturb the soil, you can kind of think of this, whatever type of disturbance it is, if it's wind erosion or water erosion or a backhoe, essentially kind of functionally pushes this time frame backwards, and you can kind of erase like tens of thousands of years at a go, depending on what level of insurance, or level of disturbance rather, whatever action is taking. And it's virtually gone forever. There are some things we can do. We talk about regenerating soil a lot, and we can restore soils, but the time frame that it would take to replace disturbance or damage to this system, if it were left to its own accord, is generally far beyond what our lifespan is. When we look just at Franklin County and isolate looking at different types of bedrock, we can see one of the reasons why there's a lot of different kinds of soil around us. So this is a very brilliantly colorful map, of course, but this is isolating out just the bedrock lithology and layer of GIS available for Franklin County. And so you can see there's basalt faces, there's granite, there's metamorphic rocks, there are some schists also kind of snaking through here. The schists are these green, dark brown stripes. And I love these maps. They're so beautiful. You really can imagine just the formation and the patterns of pressure that formed these long stripes of a single kind of rock. And you can also appreciate that if this is how soils start, then this is how we end up with a collection of soils that look so different.
Can you go back to that colorful map?
Mm-hmm.
What's red?
Red is granite. Has anybody here read Reading the Granite Landscape? Highly recommend it. It's a fabulous book.
What's the blue?
The blue is calcite, which is not a rock I'm familiar with.
Where's the Connecticut River?
The Connecticut River is on here. It is snakes down between, it looks like granite and Mesozoic basin sediment. So it would be all of this gray here is sediment. And so just north of Greenfield here, the Connecticut River takes a turn, comes in, and then it winds its way down right through the center of this basin of sediment. And then it comes out down here in Northampton, sort of vaguely visible here in the gray.
You started to say Reading the Granite Landscape.
Yes. Go find the book Reading the Granite Landscape. It's a wonderful book that follows the journey of the mountains in Dummerston, Vermont, and all of the ecology, starting with the bedrock, starting with the granite. Okay, so we're going to go back now and flip to that's sort of the crux, the framework, the architecture, say like the buildings around us, right? The structure for each type of soil here in the abiotic part of soil. So now we're going to look at the biotic part of soil. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time for kind of, this part of soil to me is just like this dance of interrelationships. So I'm just going to go through this and then I will pause and we can take a little breath. Because the abiotic structures in soil, they set this framework up, and it's the amount of soil and water predominantly in soil that makes it possible for a thriving population of microflora, microfauna to exist in soil. They, in turn, are both eating parts of the humus, this decomposed plant matter, as well as contributing to it because they die, and they, in turn, become part of that decomposing matter that is humus. There are other plants living in the soil that are also dying and contributing to that humus as well at the same time. But the living plants that are in the soil, which are taking nutrients from that humus up into their plants, that's the fiber, the structure, the carbon that they use to grow, at the same time are secreting root exudates, which are carbohydrates, sugars, and different enzymes that change the soil chemistry of the soil, which create a specific environment and can shift which microflora or microfauna are more likely to thrive. And of course, the only way that roots can do that, the only way that the roots have the ability to secrete these root exudates, which provide that food for the microbiome, is with the presence of air. Not all of the nutrients in humus are immediately available to the plants to suck up. Some of them bind with the smallest particles in the material, the abiotic part of soil, and that's called the clay-humus complex, and it's when they stick together to the clay, they bind. But not all nutrients bind, and those that don't are susceptible to, and those nutrients that are water soluble, when water passes through humus, will dissolve into that water, and then the water will take all of those nutrients out of our soil, and that's a process that my toddler calls going bye-bye, and they're gone from the soil. So, now that you understand entirely how soil works and soil builds, we're gonna hold on to this very central crux, which is the humus, because this is literally, I love this diagram, because it is really the center of everything in the soil, even though it is less than 5% of a handful of soil. This is the medium by which we measure how much carbon is in soil. This is the measurement that we're looking at in humus of how much carbon is held in soil organic carbon, and this is 80% of global carbon stock is in soil, the terrestrial carbon stock. So that's over 3 times what's found in the atmosphere in carbon dioxide, and it's second only to how much carbon is found in the ocean. There's a lot of carbon locked up in this amazing cycle. In some places there could be more. In some places we need to be careful because when it leaves the soil, it enters the air. Most of it enters the air as carbon dioxide. So for our purposes, and for policy purposes, and for, we're going to use this here to answer the question, what is healthy soil? Healthy soil is soil that has a relatively high soil organic carbon rate. And when I say relatively, I mean because we understand that it comes from a very specific parent material and it has only access to a certain amount of air and a certain amount of water depending on where it is. And so because not all soils are created equal, not all soils have the same capacity to store the same amount of carbon. But when we understand the context for what we're looking at, we can compare them to what we think their potential is. And that's the indicator that we're using. It's almost as complex as saying, like, well, can we measure your health by just your blood pressure? Or just your cholesterol? Which one's more important? Well, soil is very complicated as well, but for literature and in the industry, it's pretty widely accepted that a soil organic carbon count is an indicator of soil health. NRCS says soil health is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And that is precisely what that humus and that carbon in soil is doing. It's providing the cycle, the medium through which carbon is absorbed by plants from out of the air, returned into the soil, it passes through the soil, and when the plant dies, and through the roots in root exudates, and then some portion of that humus as it's decomposing, some portion of that CO2 is returning to the air, but some of it is locked up in the soil, and that's what we're using as our indication for soil health. It's very convenient to use soil organic carbon as a measure for soil health because it also happens to correlate with other properties of soil that provide beneficial ecosystem services to us. So higher soil organic carbon is also correlated with a higher productive capacity, so it's something that is very interesting to farmers, and there's a whole incredible world of regenerative farming and regenerative farmers that are paying very careful attention to how they manage their land and looking and measuring the results in soil organic carbon, which is just a really exciting way to flip looking at only yields, food yields. It's also a measure of biological activity and diversity, because the more you have left up there, it's an indication of how much of that microflora, microfaunal life is in your soil, dying and reproducing. Higher soil organic carbon is associated with water storage capacity and water filtration. So when we have more carbon locked up in our soils, we have cleaner water for ourselves and for our waterways. It also is provides the structure, the basis for storing nutrients and making at least a portion of those, a higher portion of those available to plants. And from a climate resiliency perspective, maybe the most important thing of all, or one of the most powerful things that it does in today's political climate and economic climate is it stores carbon and keeps it out of the atmosphere. And that is just so incredibly essential to understand and to be able to try to work toward and to maximize for long-term climate resiliency. When we're looking at soil health, we know that there is the inherent, the abiotic part of soils, which we don't control. That was determined millennia ago. The dynamic biotic properties that have developed over time that are related to that. And then there's what we do on the soil. There's how we manage it. There's we're influencers in soil health. And so that's a lot of what we got to look at, and this was our baseline. This was how we started when we were provided the opportunity to work with the Commonwealth to develop a policy plan for how to encourage healthy soils across the state of Massachusetts. Let's start with land cover. We're residents in this state, and let's look at how we have historically managed the landscape here, where we are now, and develop a plan for how to assess and enhance living soils across all land types in Massachusetts to support thriving ecosystems and communities within the Commonwealth. And the goals of this plan were to improve policies and programs, especially around climate resilience, to guide land use planning and conservation efforts across the state, to support land managers, homeowners, landscapers, anybody who has the responsibility or the authority to manage land, and to identify research and funding needs that the state can support to push this research forward. We worked with, you can see a couple different partners here. Nova Mass was very much involved in the development of this, the Perennial Agriculture Institute, and it was funded by the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So this is it's a 120-page report. It's divided into chapters by land cover, and at the end of the talk, there's a QR code that I'll put up on the last slide that has a link where you can go and download the PDF off of mass.gov. So as far as we know, Dorothy also included this, Dorothea, in her introduction. As far as I know, this is the first policy type in the country to include soils that are not natural or working soils, what we call. So to look at recreational, residential, developed lands. There's been a lot of focus on healthy soils in agriculture, a really strong and excellent movement around regenerative agriculture, no-till farming. But there hasn't been very much focus on your sort of average residential landscape, schools, parks. What about all the rest of this land? So we're really excited to just take a look at the whole picture and not isolate out different types of lands. But we did use the 2016 land cover data, which is about to get updated to 2023, which is great because then we have to go back to the beginning and redo all of this work. So stay tuned in a couple of years. Maybe I'll be able to come and give you an update here, but we used 2016 land cover data and we did simplify it. So we consolidated down into 5 different land cover types in order to be able to do some analysis that was meaningful for implementation. And then we applied to that, the NRCS publishes information by land cover type and soil type, how much soil organic carbon they would expect to be in high performing soil of this particular land type and cover. So down here, so for each land cover type, we consolidated the categories into wetlands, forests and trees, agriculture, recreational and ornamental landscapes, and then developed and impervious landscapes or urban landscapes. And you can see at the bottom here of each section, there's a certain amount of carbon per acre. So wetlands, 321 tons of carbon per acre. That's the highest concentration of soil organic carbon of any kind of land cover. That's followed by forests, which 87. Agriculture, and in Massachusetts, because we're using land cover to determine these categories, this is predominantly hay and pasture and then tilled crops. And so orchards actually fall into trees and grasslands, which is just an interesting little thing. Then it's an average of those. So obviously it's a huge field, agriculture, pun intended. And it's also very complex because the management styles vary so widely from crop to crop. And so this is a mathematical average of the different types of agriculture and what we would expect to find in the soil based on that type of agriculture. Recreational and ornamental landscapes, so this would be your lawns, gardens, parks, golf courses, sports fields. Again, an average of what we would expect to find in that type of land cover, and then developed and impervious lands.
Did you say that orchards are included in forests?
Orchards are funny because it depends on the style and the maturity of the orchards. So the way that the GIS LiDAR works and the way that the information was picked up and then was analyzed, if the orchard was able to be identified as individual trees in the landscape, the trees part of it would have gotten included as trees or as part of, as a like forest, and then the area around it as a grass landscape, but that might have been counted in the agriculture as grass or hay. If it was very dense and it wasn't able to pick up the individual trees, it would have gotten either classified as the recreational and ornamental landscapes or as forest. So what we found is that wetlands, which are 12% of the coverage of land cover in Massachusetts, actually account for the largest amount of soil organic carbon in the state. And this is because the very specific biotic properties of wetland soils, which are able to capture and store enormous amounts of carbon, followed by forests, 156 million metric tons, and then turf and ornamental lands, impervious lands, and farmland was actually very, very little. We love our farms, and we should love our farms. From a soil organic carbon perspective, it's a very small percentage in the state. One of the exercises that we did in this plan was to follow through, like, what happens with business as usual development. Like, we can look back and we can see the percentage of forests and agricultural lands and wetlands that have been developed into these recreational or ornamental landscapes and urban landscapes in the past. So if we just continue that trajectory into the future at the same rates of development, we're looking at a loss of forest and farms, wetlands, clearing of vegetation, a relatively large construction footprint for new buildings, with radical grading, most often very poor soil stockpiling, which means that they're either just removing soils without worrying about whether we can use them or not on the same site, or mixing subsoils with topsoils, very compacted subsoils, and a relatively low permeability level. And this is depressing. It's also the status quo. It's a very conservative estimate because those things are changing. They have been changing. There are regulations in place that have been encouraging development to increase permeability, to better manage soil. But it's happening, adoption of new things happens slowly. And so if we continue the kind of trend, then we're looking at losing 25 million metric tons of soil organic carbon in the state by 2050, which is approximately equivalent of like 900,000 tons of carbon dioxide back into the air. Which would be a shame because we know that is one of the gases that exacerbates climate change. So from this, we were able to draw a matrix of recommendations for policymakers, for wetland regulators, for conservation commissions, for landscape architects and designers, for all kinds of people that work with the management of land in each of these different land cover types. And I saw a hand over here.
Does this take into account decrease in population that's happening? I mean, the demographics are significant for the U.S. and the world.
Yeah, I think it did take that into account just with.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sorry, the question was whether this looked at like population decline as opposed to, taking in an assumption of growth. And I think I can't answer which model because those are all models, like projections for population growth or decline. But I know that population was one of the factors that was looked into it, that was considered. Although I do want to say that this is isolating soil organic carbon. So this is not what this 25 million metric tons is not taking into account is the above ground carbon. So we cut forest, you have all that tree material, if that is being burnt or being ground into sawdust or now being the carbon loss from that is not included in this measurement. This is just strictly looking at soil organic. So let's dig a little bit more into the residential, recreational, ornamental land cover type. This is where I think there's a lot. We all personally have some relationship with a piece of land, whether we're homeowners or whether we're renting and we're gardening. But this is land that we occupy. 62% of this land cover is in residential parcels, 52% single family homes. So that's it totals 271,000 acres of land that is residential in Massachusetts, and around 10.8 million metric tons of soil organic carbon. So that's a lot of carbon that we are responsible for. We and our actions can influence whether that stays in the soil, whether it increases, or whether it's converted. And again, the business as usual case here, we looked at the potential for like 20,000 new acres of land being converted from forests, wetlands, agricultural land into this section, into this land cover type by 2050. And I'm not for the purpose of this presentation, I'm jumping to kind of the worst scenario. So if you look at the plan itself, we actually developed 3 different scenarios. So there's the business as usual scenario, which is let's just pretend nothing changes ever. And we just keep on doing the same things we've been doing. And then we looked at a tomorrow, everybody in the government reads this report and takes everything to heart and makes everything change tomorrow and then encompasses all of these recommendations. So what would it look like if we did, to the nth degree, everything that we possibly could to protect and increase soil organic carbon in our soils? And then we looked at a kind of midline, moderate route in the middle that is probably more realistic. And so you can go and find those different scenarios. So here's a little smattering of some of the actions that recommendations that came out of this particular chapter. Many of these will feel familiar to you, I'm sure. So we can reduce lawn, plant more perennials and trees. They have bigger root systems. Bigger root systems means more biological activity below the soil, more root exits, more air and water getting down farther. We can plant regionally appropriate, beneficial perennials. Permanent vegetation is really important because remember that every time we disturb soil, we get set back in that timeline of soil development. We can limit disturbance and new development, either personally when we're building or through policies on a municipal level. We can practice no-till organic gardening, which you can find some information for on the table over here. And we can just add trees and shrubs to our lawns. We don't have to get rid of them. It's incredible. You can just add trees and shrubs to lawns, and it makes a huge difference. Lawns. We're a big topic. Everyone loves to hate on lawns right now. For good reason, because soil, the deeper the roots that you get with perennials, the more soil you can sequester, yes. However, lawns can also sequester quite a large amount of carbon in and of themselves. So when you compare them to impervious surfaces or degraded surfaces, they're certainly an improvement. And we can double the amount of soil organic carbon stored in our lawns through management practices. So not all lawns are created equal either. This was a recent study that was published that looked at the soil organic carbon sequestration rates of new turf. And what you're looking at here is the rate of the increase in soil organic carbon. So even though this line here on the graph goes down, you're actually building soil organic carbon over the course of 50 years. So what this is looking at is that within the first 10 years of a new lawn being established, there's a really quite high soil organic carbon sequestration rate. So it's building soil health. And then that drops over time until it reaches a point where if it's continued to be managed as lawn, then it can't absorb any more soil organic carbon that it already has. And that's when, to change it, if we want to bump that up again where it's leveled off, then we bring in a tree, then we bring in some shrubs. And we can then increase that even farther. But healthy turf management can make a really big difference. And again, some of these will feel familiar. Raising your mower heights, testing your soil and fertilizing wisely with organic fertilizer, leaving all the grass clippings on the lawn, diversifying your lawn, so zero herbicides, just allowing your lawn to be clover and self-heal and pussy toes and whatever else works its way in there, aerating, electrifying your equipment, which is not necessarily building the soil organic carbon itself, but I'm going to flip back to the previous slide. Mowing and fertilizer related emissions from establishing lawns go and offset almost a third of that initial big first 10-year period of accumulating soil carbon. So the lower that we can keep our emissions for our management of lawns, the more benefit that we actually get off of that soil organic carbon. And then petitioning your town to direct developers to leave good topsoil in the property being developed. And that's a vague recommendation because every town has its own set of zones and bylaws and whatnot, and there's different pathways to make that happen. But basically what we're saying is soil that is excavated on site should stay on site, and it should be stratified and kept in as much as possible put back in the layer from which it was taken. And that would make a huge difference because it would mean that homeowners might start with a moderate section of lawn that was already partially on its way or further along its journey of reaching its maximum soil organic carbon sort of level of saturation. So I only have a few minutes here, but I want to kind of fly through two projects or two case studies. It's really 3 projects that RDG has worked on, and that illustrate how we're applying and have applied some of these things to our work, and how we're hoping to encourage other groups in the state to think about these. So these are I'm going to start with 2 residential projects. These are both new houses. One of them is in Littleton, Massachusetts, and the other one is in Hurley, New York. Both of them were forested, although at different states. The site in Littleton, Mass had been clear cut and was maybe 5 or 6 year old, mostly poplar forest, regenerated from stumps. And in Hurley, it had also been logged, but maybe 30, 40 years ago, and was a much more mature forest with an open understory here. Both clients came to us saying, we want our new houses to have an ecological, sustainable outcome when they're built. But and both of them look beautiful. So this is a year after each of the houses were sort of finished the final stages of being built. The difference being that in Littleton, we were brought into the project after the initial clearing and the project had been set up, and the contractors had already been chosen and had started working. And in this case, it was an 8-acre parcel, and the developer was like, okay, I'm clearing 2.5 acres. It was between 2.5 or 3 acres. And so before the house was designed, before the house was sited on the property, it was like, well, you're going to put it on the highest property point because obviously you want the view. So we're just going to clear the highest 2.5 to 3 acres, and then you can figure out where you want to put your house. That was because they were developers, contractors that were developers working in the area. They also didn't stockpile any of the soil on the site hardly at all. They had other projects that they were constantly moving and flipping things around from. So the client didn't have the option or didn't step in. After it was a very challenging project for us, but we were able to come in and we helped the client plan and seed about 2 acres of meadow and establish a modest lawn. And there's a lot of work here to do still, but there's some small areas here of success. And I want to point out one thing which I told the client that they shouldn't use any sod because it's just such a horrendous carbon footprint involved in growing sod, stripping it off of some other farm, rolling it up, and then fossil fuel transporting it to another house. And I really discouraged it, and the contractor convinced her that she was going to be really unhappy in the spring if she came and there was no already established grass right against her door. And then the following spring, this is what she found. She found the sod brown and not green yet, and all of the diversified seeded lawn that we had done around and the rest of the yard already greened up. And so this is I'm particularly proud of this photo, and we'll save it to show other clients, but it's really almost never worth importing rolled sod. So now I live in Hurley, New York, and in Hurley, New York, we got there before the developers did, and we we sited the house in the woods with the architect before any clearing started. We knew exactly where it was going to go, and then we put a 25-foot tape measure around it, and we said, you're not allowed to cut down any trees beyond 25 feet, and in fact, we limited them to leaving an oak tree that was 13 feet from one of the back doors of the house, and that was challenging for the contractor. They had to, in some cases, get different equipment. They had to transfer the fill material to backfill the foundation from a large truck to a smaller truck because they couldn't get the large truck around the house. And we basically left our red tape up around, and this is what that looked like a year later. when you compare the aerial photographs to these two sites that are roughly the same scale, the difference is really quite striking. Development, this is today, this is today's term, like Chicago, totally standard development style, and it could all look like this. It would make a very big difference. And I'm running short on time, but I wanted to bring an example that was a little bit more close to home for those of us who are not trying to build houses from scratch in the woods, as I assume not all of us are at the moment. And so this is the story of a project in Haydenville, Mass, another residential project at Williamsburg, that of a house that had been built a while back, and had this entry lawn when you first drove up at the end of the driveway in front of the garage, between the garage and the house, that never grew good lawn. And this was a residue of native soils with construction fill, highly compacted, got all the snowplow dumped on it. For 10 years, the homeowners here who have an incredibly lovely, lush garden, a beautiful homestead farm, and they're amazing stewards of their land, but through all of the like chicken manure and whatever they could put on this, they couldn't get even lawn to grow here. And so we worked with them, and I think any other landscaper would have come in and been like, you just need to start over, like get out, excavate, get rid of this, bring in new topsoil. And we're like, well, I think we can work with this, let's try. And so we brought in straight compost from Martin's Farm with biochar. They have a mix that has 10% biochar, which is essentially pure carbon. It's incomplete burn of a woody material. And so it's like as isolated carbon as you can get. And so we rototilled that into the top 6 inches of soil. It was really hard to get it to really feel like it was incorporated. And then we seeded it, and there was a little oops here where there was a, full disclosure, there was a free packet of like pollinator wildflower seeds that had been given a cent in as a promotional thing and when we ordered seeds, and it got spread unintentionally and it didn't have the things in it that we wanted, but anyway, here we go. We're out here. We've got some amazing growth the first year. So this was the same year that we did all of that work. There's an overseeded, ultra-diverse meadow here, along with a thyme path and some perennials just very much around the edge and one single tree. September 2017, so this is, less than a year after we planted it, and the homeowners were really shocked that we were able to like change. I think in the 10 years that they lived there, they would never have imagined that you could get that kind of plant growth off of the really degraded lawn that they had been struggling with. And after the first winter, there was some dieback, and our strategy for this was just keep on adding that soil organic carbon and over time. So quick and slow. Wood chips, material, whenever they weed it or chop down, leave it, let it decay in sight. And by 2021, it's a really lovely perennial garden / meadow mix. And all of these perennials were grown from seed. So no carbon footprint there, slow, like very, very minimum carbon footprint, plastic pots. Nursery fertilizers, all of those things were avoided in this case, or many of them were avoided by having the patience to grow echinacea and other perennials from seed. So the lessons there that we learned, amending soil rather than replacing soil, which happens, you would be just shocked at how fast people just truck soil around from one place to another in our field. It pays to plant seeds. They can self-select to where they want to go, and they have a low carbon footprint. Embracing the change as your ecosystem develops, because there's a parent material in there, and if it's construction fill, you don't really know exactly what that parent material is, so we need to take some time and let that figure itself out, because the plants will know. And having our goal to mulch less and less every year, so we're mulching initially, and then allowing the plants to fully cover, and slowing down for some time and patience to see what happens. So I wanted to just kind of summarize here, we have the what we need to watch out for soil health. Primary one is soil conversion, for whether it's forest or agricultural land, hopefully not wetlands. We don't want to convert land that hasn't already been developed into developed land unless we can absolutely help it. Management styles, how we manage the land, and climate change, of course, with increased disease pressures and water. We have our soil health indicators. These are the things we're going to look for really healthy soils. We don't have low disturbance, soils that have not been disturbed, soils that have relatively high soil organic carbon, understanding where they are and where they started, and permanent vegetation. And last, we have this little list here, this little checklist of what we can all do. Again, these are probably very familiar to you, a lot of them. Keeping permanent vegetative cover on all of our soils, encouraging a diverse soil food web by allowing biodiversity over the soil as well, and not disturbing, remineralizing, managing nutrients with organic composts, and then a lot of this is in protection from compaction. The lightest lawn mowing equipment you can get, the lightest, the least amount of tilling, protection from contamination, and protection from conversion. So I can go back to that list. I want to say thank you to all. I'm a few minutes over. I'm sorry, we got a little bit of a late start. And I want to point out that there's a QR code here up on the screen that you can scan and download the full Healthy Soils Action Plan. You can also be in touch with us at our office through our website. We have a contact form. We had over 200 listening sessions across the state from all different groups of people as part of the action plan. And the state is now in the process of distributing over $11 million in implementation funds to projects, and you've got 3 different grants that we're hoping to get through that process to bring this information and more to developers, to contractors, to interest groups, or specifically around the licenses, that trying to link some of these best management practices to licenses that contractors hold, and trying to get really into the grid about how do we take these recommendations, take the science that we've sorted through all of these studies, and figure out how, with Massachusetts state policy and regulations, where are those pivot points where we can introduce some of these in a way that will make a difference. So if you'd like to be kept in the loop, you can reach out to us there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So either you misspoke or you seriously misunderstood. You said that of the global carbon, 80% of it is stored in soil.
Correct.
And then you said that was second only to oceans, which,
Terrestrial carbon. So in terrestrial carbon meaning that the plant matter above ground, and so the oceans store the largest amount of carbon, air, and then terrestrial carbon. So then you're looking at trees, right, not the soil. So 80% of terrestrial carbon,
not global
yes,
carbon, terrestrial carbon.
yeah, is held in the soil. Yes.
Yeah, so some of us have been listening to Moomow, who's been talking about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and concentrating it in the soil. And you're not talking about that. You're not talking about how to get the carbon out of the atmosphere and lower the greenhouse gas. You're talking about the carbon that is in the soil and how it's measured already. Is that right?
We're talking about, I think what we're talking about includes that as part of it. So what we're talking about is understanding the mechanisms by how that works, right? So that by pulling, well, there are many potential ways for how to get soil from the atmosphere into carbon, including all kinds of pumps and crazy ideas. But one of the ways that happens is through this, the soil food web, right? Through this cycle of pulling carbon. So we're talking about how to maximize that through the practices that we do on our own, in our own gardens and our own yards. But part of that is understanding what you might do that would do the opposite, right? What do you do to land that might release carbon from the soil back into the atmosphere? So if we're going to pull carbon out of the air and into the soil, we also have to make sure at the same time that we're preventing carbon from going back into the soil, or else we're not really doing anything in a net exchange. Does that make sense? So it's a both and. We have to, yes, we definitely have to bring carbon down into the soil through perennial plant management, through making sure that we're not disturbing soils, through increasing and maximizing all of our lawns, as much soil carbon as they can sequester. And we have to make sure that we're not doing things that are releasing carbon back out into the air. I'm glad you're connecting with Muma. We heavily delved into his literature for this paper. He's cited all over the place. So.
I distributed that chart that I got through Keith all over the place. And, yeah.
Great. Yeah.
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 When I hear people talk about growing, they talk about nitrogen and fixing nitrogen, and I don't know anything about that. And I don't know whether it was somewhere on some graph or that's, where is that?
Okay, I can,
Because I couldn't read what was on that.
yeah, so that would fall into the humus, like back into those nutrients that are cycled in through humus and then out through plants when they absorb them, and then back in again when they decompose and die. So those are what we will call like nutrients and micronutrients that are all part of that cycle, that are, when I talked about how there's nutrients that are cycled into the soil and then binds with clay. Maybe they can stick around for longer. Some of them are more available, some of them are less available. Some of them are water soluble, so if water passes through the soil, we could lose them. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, that's where they all fall in. They're nutrients, but they're very mobile. So they might be in soil at one particular type of time, it's a snapshot, but they're moving around. And that's a lot of what I want to express in that like crazy diagram of arrows, is that when we get a soil test, it's a snapshot. Like soil, especially that part of soil, the biotic, is changing all the time. And so anytime we send our soils away, we're just getting a snapshot in the moment of some of what's happening or some of what's available. And most tests aren't even giving you the full picture. And so it's changing, it's a very dynamic thing. And that's one of those things, is those nutrients, because phosphorus moves. You're capturing it in the moment, how much phosphorus, but tomorrow's going to be different. Hi.
I just wanted to say I was heartened to hear how you improved that compacted soil just by continually adding more organic matter and the biochar in the compost without tilling.
And well, we rototilled in the compost and the biochar initially into the top
The first time.
6 inches, just once. And then no more tilling and no more mowing either. And just foot traffic. No machines. Yeah. So I think we have a few more minutes. Yeah, hi.
So, yeah, if you put down brand new turf, it would sequester more carbon than some old turf, but it would still be better to plant more things in your old turf because the impact of putting down new turf is greater than what it will sequester.
Yes, I think Jen, it's so hard. Sorry.
Repeat that?
Should I repeat the question? Yes, I should. I'm sorry, I haven't been repeating the questions. Thank you for reminding me. So the question is whether it's better to just take an older turf that is maybe compacted or degraded, like the one that we started with in Haydenville, and replace it with new turf, or keep it as it is and add trees and shrubs to it. Is that the question? Yeah. And it's one of those hard questions to answer without being on site and being able to see what the surrounding area looks like and what the ecosystem is and what that parent material is and like the history of how it got to being where it is now. But in general, yes, I think, you know, there's a lot that you can do in integrating perennial plants to intersperse those things, but it has to come with a change in management. So where turf reaches a saturation where even well-managed lawn isn't going to sequester any more carbon than it already has is because you're continuing to manage it. You're still cutting the lawn, you're still managing it as lawn. So if you're introducing shrubs and trees, but you're also letting that old grass grow a little higher, you're making sure that you're aerating it to try to introduce more air to try to decompact whatever damage has been done there before, and you're changing your management style for the rest of the turf, you might be able to bring it all up without replacing it.
So, is there, you said a lot about management, whether it's turf or agriculture, like a system that uses chemical-based pesticides, herbicides, that's got to decrease, I would think, decrease organic matter carbon capacity greatly versus one which uses non-chemical-based fertilizers, pesticides, etc.
Yes, and again, it's not as straightforward. Sorry, okay,
So you look at soil organic matter, like
yes.
yours was 7%, which was 5 to 7%, which is relatively high for cropland, agricultural cropland. I mean, that's a decent organic soil. But just the change of management, as you said,
Yes.
can sequester a great deal of difference in carbon sequestration and soil life and mycorrhizal and all that other stuff.
Yes, and that, so the question here is whether just substituting, I think this is a rephrase, substituting like agricultural lens under chemical management for organic management would directly result in it.
I wouldn't say organic management, I would say non-chemical based.
Non-chemical based management, right? So it's not, we don't get confused with certifications because we're not talking about certifications. I'm following you there. So yes, and the biggest reason why 5 to 7% is so high for agricultural soil is because of constant tillage. And it's not necessarily because of an input, whether that input is fertile, is chemical based or not chemical based. It's because every time you mix up those top horizons of soil, you're exposing them to air and you're increasing the speed that the decomposition rate is happening, and essentially it's releasing a much higher percentage of soil organic carbon back into the air than would happen if you didn't get it in till. So it's only part of the full picture of how management practices can influence that. So certainly very important and excellent for all kinds of other reasons too. Obviously not just because of the soil organic carbon in the spot where you're applying them.
We found a little, we've been organic for a while, since 2016. And prior to that, we didn't see a lot of earthworms. But in the last 2-3 years, like, I grow mums, I think the mums, there's earthworms holding the back. Like, there's a ton of earthworms, which is a nice feeling and good to see.
Yeah, and there's so if you think of that, so you're saying that, since 2016, just not having, and some initial management changes in the farm, you're seeing this explosion of soil life, including soil earthworms. If so the first sort of snapshot there of the components of soil is the abiotic is about 45%. Mineral substance. So you've got minerals and then about 20, a little less than 20 of air and water, and then that 5 to 7% of organic matter. So a compacted soil, you don't have any less mineral substance, but you've got way less air and way less water, and so you don't have space for any of that soil life. And so the soil compaction is so hard to reverse. That is probably the hardest thing. It's something we struggle with all the time when we want to compact at sites, because you can essentially key line plow, right? Like you can rip in, but like at the same time you're ripping in to try to get air in, you're driving a tractor, and compacting again what's under its wheels. You can get air spaders in. you can try, there's all these different mechanical ways to decompact, but you're limited in compacting a portion again while you're working with the equipment that you need to decompact at the same time. And so one of the, if you can walk your way back and you can just prevent the compaction from happening in the first place, we'll be in a much better part because it's incredibly difficult to try to walk backwards from that. But seeing something like earthworms or seeing changes in life and soil is an indication that it's work, that it's happening. It's on the right trajectory. So I think we can take one more question, and then I'm gonna need to turn it back over to Nancy. Maybe we'll go over here since you haven't had a chance to.
So my question is about nutrients. I had my soil tested, and when it came back, it said you are off the chart in everything. And it's because I have a compost pile. I turn it, I let it sit for 6 months, and then I spread it on my soil. But I'm doing something wrong. And I don't know how well my vegetables will grow this year if I've got so much phosphorus and so much, potassium and so much everything. And then he said I didn't have enough nitrogen. I'm like, well, how could that be? This is all decomposed, why isn't there nitrogen? So, what, is my food gonna grow?
Where did you get where was the soil tested?
At UMass.
At UMass. When you filled out the soil tests, did you get the opportunity to check some different boxes to say like what you were going to be growing?
No, I just said it's a vegetable garden.
A vegetable garden, yeah, okay. So the question is about soil test results and how to interpret something that says you're off the charts and if that's a bad thing. So soil test, you can only test for what you're looking for, right? And soil tests are complicated because they're looking and they're giving you a range based on two things. One, what they think your soil should have, and two, what they think you want in your soil. So what you think you're going to be growing. So when they say off the charts, they're saying like, well, based on an average, Western Mass garden, and then based on the fact that you want to grow vegetables, this is where we think your soil, the nutrient levels that we would expect to see in your soil, and then what we think that you would want for this particular crop. And that doesn't always work, but you have to take this with a grain of salt sometimes because if you happen to take a selection of your soil that's very high in compost, but this is a soil test, not a compost test, then they're not expecting to find that level of nutrients, right? Also, if you're, if there's no nitrogen there or there's no nitrogen showing up on the test, like what kind of nitrogen are they looking for? Are they looking for soluble nitrogen or not soluble nitrogen? There's a ton of information to dig into in that test to see whether that test is the right and appropriate test for your soil and for what you actually want to do. And it's a snapshot.
Just plant your vegetables.
I would plant your vegetables. I mean, the thing.
I've got lots of worms, that's it.
I would plant your vegetables there. It sounds like you're doing great, and you might have, you can also get compost tested for compost nutrients, which is a different test than soil tests because they're scaled differently. So they're expecting something that's extremely high in nutrient levels if they're expecting to test it as compost, as an amendment. And it might just have been that, there was a handful, it was just a little richer than what they were expecting. But I often say soil tests are great, you can learn from them, but you have to understand what you're looking for if you're going to learn from them. And the best way to understand how soil is performing is with your eyes. Because you can see if your soil can support diversity, then it's healthy soil. And you're doing great.
One last question.
Okay, I defer to Nancy. Nancy says yes, go ahead.
Have you run into issues with jump worms, which are soil depleting worms, which we have?
Of course, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere?
Yeah.
And how are you dealing with
Water
it?
everywhere.
Jumping.
Sorry, jumping worms are.
That particular question
There you go.
could take us half an hour. So unfortunately, I've got to say, talk to her afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much Rachel, and thank you. That was fabulous. As I mentioned, Cheech has been videoing, so we're gonna send it out. And I'm hoping you can send us the link to that study. Maybe we can email that out to everybody. That would be a really great thing to do. So also I want to invite you to join thanking Dorothea for inspiring this series. And just for her passion around soil and understanding all of it. And she wrote a pamphlet about 5 years ago, and it's over here on the table. So come on by and pick it up. It's called Sink Carbon in Your Garden, Build Soil Health While Addressing the Climate Change. And there's other interesting resources over here also about, there's some gardening cards and some pollinator plan kinds of stuff. I also want to invite you to join us for some of the other things that we're working on, particularly at Just Roots. And we work on Monday, so if anyone's interested in helping us with pollinator areas that we're working on there, please talk to Elizabeth at the table here. And also, they will be offering a tour, we will be offering a tour, probably Elizabeth is going to offer a tour at Just Roots annual plant sale, which is in the middle of May. So if you're interested, again, talk to Elizabeth about that. If you're interested in Greening Greenfield City Hall garden, and you want to just find out more about it or chat about it, please talk with Mary. She's in the way back, but maybe she'll come up to the info table. And please talk with her about that. And finally, before you leave, there was an evaluation sheet on each chair, and if you could please fill this out. The comments on the evaluation are incredibly important to us to help us make these events that we do be more relevant and meaningful to you. And this evaluation has two sides, and if you look on the back side, there's a bunch of ideas of possible topics that you might be interested in. There's also a blank space for you to write in what topic you would like us to bring here to share with everybody and for you to share your thoughts. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for sharing your ideas and questions. And thank you for caring for our planet Earth. And thank you, Rachel.